Ladies and gentlemen, let me ask you something. Have you ever seen someone so full of themselves, so hungry for control, that they thought they could define your life? Have you ever felt the weight of a person who needed you to orbit around them, to feed their ego, to validate their every move? Today, I'm going to show you something powerful, something liberating, what truly breaks a narcissistic man. And it's not anger, it's not revenge. It's the quiet, unstoppable force of someone who claims their life, their power, and their joy, and never looks back. Indifference is louder than anger because it signals something a narcissistic man cannot tolerate. He no longer controls your emotional world. Anger, tears, or drama feed his sense of importance. Each reaction, each attempt to prove yourself or make him accountable becomes fuel for his ego. He thrives on attention, even if it's negative, because it affirms his central place in your life. Indifference, however, is different. It's not reaction, it's refusal. It is the quiet, unwavering message that your peace, your life, and your happiness do not depend on his validation. It doesn't yell. It doesn't chase. It simply exists, complete and unbothered, as if he were a shadow you no longer acknowledge. And that silence, that calm disengagement, is deafening to him. It undermines the very foundation of his power because he built it on the assumption that people will bend, argue, or plead to be seen and approved by him. When you stop offering that, you are no longer a stage on which he performs. You are a life that continues without him. That's why indifference feels like a threat. It cannot be bargained with, manipulated, or intimidated. It doesn't need confrontation because it's grounded in something unshakable, your self-respect. It tells him without words that the center of your world is not him, and that truth is more painful than any insult or scream. The brilliance of indifference is that it is not reactive. It is proactive in its simplicity. It protects your energy, preserves your dignity, and signals that your happiness is yours alone. For a narcissistic man who has spent years conditioning others to orbit around him, nothing can be more destabilizing than realizing that no amount of charm, coercion, or intimidation can pull you back into his gravity. Your calm, your detachment, your indifference, this is the sound he cannot stand. When indifference begins to speak, it opens the door for something even more powerful: boundaries. Because once a narcissistic man realizes you no longer orbit his world, he tests the edges, pushing, provoking, trying to reclaim the attention he once commanded effortlessly. And this is where boundaries become your quiet armor. Not shouted, not dramatic, not weaponized. Boundaries are the invisible lines that say, "This far, no further." They are a refusal wrapped in calm, a consistent way of showing that your time, your emotions, your dignity are not negotiable. While indifference withdraws reaction, boundaries declare presence. They are the unmovable pillars of your life, silently saying you will not bend to anyone's ego, no matter how persistent. For a narcissistic man, boundaries are terrifying because they are mirrors he cannot ignore. They reflect truth he cannot spin, that your life is not a performance for him, that your choices belong to you, and that control has shifted away from his hands. Unlike anger, which he can mock, and tears, he can exploit, boundaries cannot be argued with. They simply exist, steady and unyielding, and demand respect without a single word. And the beauty of boundaries is that they protect your energy while revealing strength. Every no, lived without guilt, every limit upheld with consistency, is a crack in the fortress of his perceived dominance. Over time, these quiet daily acts of self-respect dismantle his control far more than confrontation ever could. They teach him, silently but unmistakably, that power built on manipulation cannot survive where autonomy thrives. In the stillness of your limits, in the firmness of your choices, he encounters something he cannot manipulate, cannot charm, and cannot dominate: a life that is whole, independent, and untouchable. That is the heartbreak he never anticipated. When boundaries stand firm, they do something even more profound. They awaken your self-worth, because living with limits is not just about keeping someone out, it's about keeping yourself in. It's about recognizing that your value does not hinge on his approval, his praise, or his fleeting interest. A narcissistic man thrives on the illusion that he defines everyone around him. But when you ground yourself in you, our own worth, that illusion begins to crumble. He cannot endure it when he realizes that no matter how he twists, manipulates, or demands, he cannot diminish who you are. Self-worth is different from confidence. It's deeper, quieter, unshakable. It is the inner knowledge that you are enough, complete, and deserving, not because someone else says so, but because you simply are. And when you operate from that place, your boundaries no longer feel like walls, they feel like roots. They anchor you, they nourish you. And in watching you nurture yourself and seeing that your life cannot be unsettled by his antics, he feels a sense of helplessness that anger or drama could never create. Because a narcissistic man feeds on reflection, on the dependency and reactions of others. But self-worth cuts off the supply at its source. Your joy, your peace, your decisions, they exist independent of him. You no longer orbit his needs or anxieties. You stand fully as your own gravity, and nothing he says or does can rewrite that truth. That is what unsettles him more than confrontation or criticism, the realization that he cannot touch what you have built inside yourself. Every moment you honor your worth, every time you refuse to shrink, every instance you choose your life over his control is another quiet blow to the illusion of his power. And in that space, calm, grounded, unyielding self-worth, he encounters the one thing he cannot comprehend and cannot endure, someone whole, free, and untouchable. When self-worth takes root, it naturally gives rise to a power few understand, but everyone feels: the power of silence. Because once you know your value and honor your boundaries, you no longer need to argue, explain, or justify yourself. Silence becomes your shield, your statement, and your freedom all at once. A narcissistic man depends on noise, on reactions, debates, defenses, and emotional storms to feel significant. He feeds on attention, even conflict, because it signals that the world still revolves around him. But silence? Silence is a refusal to participate in the script he has written. It doesn't scream, it doesn't plead, it simply exists. It is sovereignty lived in the quietest, most unassailable way. When you speak less, react less, and stop performing for his recognition, the effect is almost unbearable to him. He cannot manipulate a quiet confidence, cannot provoke a response that fuels his ego, and cannot reclaim control that you are no longer offering. This silence is not coldness, it is presence. It is the calm knowing that your energy, your emotions, and your life are yours alone. Every quiet decision to remain composed, every refusal to argue or justify reinforces that you are not a character in his story anymore. And in that stillness, he sees what he cannot understand, a life that continues with joy, dignity, and purpose without him at the center. This is why silence is louder than any confrontation, sharper than any accusation, and more devastating than any betrayal. It strips away the drama he thrives on and exposes the truth he cannot manipulate, that you are no longer dependent, no longer seeking, and no longer subject to his control. In choosing silence over reaction, you are not surrendering. You are claiming yourself. You are unshakable. You are sovereign. And that is something he simply cannot endure. And when silence becomes your armor, authenticity quietly takes its place as your greatest weapon. Because living quietly with self-worth and boundaries is one thing, but showing up as your full, unapologetic self is another entirely. A narcissistic man fears authenticity because it cannot be controlled, manipulated, or performed for. He thrives on people who mold themselves to his expectations, who wear masks to protect his ego. But when you are real, when your laughter, your tears, your joy, and even your anger belong entirely to you, he encounters something he cannot touch. Authenticity is magnetic and unsettling at the same time. It draws people in while shattering illusions. It refuses the scripts he has written and the roles he has assigned. Every moment you act in alignment with your truth, every time you express yourself without fear of judgment, every choice you make because it resonates with your heart rather than his desires becomes a silent rebellion. And he cannot bear it because he cannot manufacture authenticity. He cannot twist it or diminish it. It exists independently of him, and that independence is exactly what destabilizes the carefully constructed narrative of his superiority. When you embrace who you truly are, flaws, strengths, quirks, and all, you are no longer a supporting actor in his story. You are a life lived on your own terms. And watching someone thrive in truth without fear or apology is far more terrifying to him than any confrontation or argument. Authenticity exposes the emptiness of control, the fragility behind arrogance, and the hollowness of validation sought through manipulation. It silently tells him that your life cannot be borrowed, bought, or coerced. It is yours alone. And that truth, lived boldly and beautifully, is something he cannot stand, because it shows him a reality in which his dominance no longer exists. And when authenticity shines, growth inevitably follows. And that growth is something a narcissistic man cannot tolerate. Because growth is not just change, it is transformation. a rewriting of the story in which he no longer holds the pen. He thrives when others are predictable, stuck, and malleable, so every step you take toward becoming whole, independent, and self-directed unsettles him in ways words cannot convey. Growth does not scream or shout, it moves quietly, steadily, reshaping your life from the inside out. It is the new confidence in your posture, the calm in your decision-making, the clarity in your priorities, and the courage to walk paths he never intended you to tread. Every lesson learned, every fear confronted, every boundary strengthened, every joy reclaimed is a subtle dismantling of his influence. And the more he sees you grow, the more he realizes that the life he once dominated no longer belongs to him. For him, growth is a mirror reflecting a truth he refuses to see, that he cannot control, manipulate, or intimidate someone who is actively becoming their own person. And this is why watching someone heal and evolve is so unbearable for him. It exposes the fragility of the power he clings to. You are no longer playing by his rules, you are authoring a new narrative where you are the protagonist, and your peace, happiness, and fulfillment do not depend on his validation or interference. Growth transforms every former weakness into strength and every former attachment into autonomy. And in witnessing this evolution, he sees the one thing he cannot recover or influence, a life fully claimed, fully lived, and fully yours. The story he thought he controlled has been rewritten. And that is the truth he cannot endure. And as growth takes hold, something remarkable happens. You stop needing validation from him, or anyone who has never truly valued you. Because when you evolve, when you reclaim your story, you realize that your worth is internal, not negotiated. You no longer measure yourself by his approval, his attention, or his fleeting praise, and that is exactly what terrifies a narcissistic man. He depends on your need for validation, on the subtle tug of insecurity because it keeps him relevant, powerful, and central in your world. But when you stop seeking it, when you walk through life confident that your life is yours and your value is inherent, he encounters a void he cannot fill. You don't need to argue, explain, or beg to be seen. You already are. You don't ask for recognition, you give it to yourself. And that absence, that refusal to let your sense of self be borrowed or dictated, is deafening to someone who built his world on the reactions of others. Every comply. NT ignored, every demand unmet, every attempt to manipulate your self-image met with calm indifference, becomes a silent dismantling of his perceived power. It is freedom lived out loud, not through words, but through presence. And as he watches, he feels a helplessness he cannot articulate, because he cannot manufacture validation, he cannot force appreciation, and he cannot reclaim the influence that is no longer there. You exist fully in your own light, unshakable, untethered, and unbothered by his attempts to draw you back into his orbit. That is the ultimate disruption, not confrontation, not revenge, but self-reliance and inner certainty. The moment you stop needing to be seen by him, the moment your life belongs to you and no one else, that is the moment he loses the very thing he relied upon, your dependence, and nothing he does can bring it back. And in that liberation, you have become untouchable. And once you stop needing validation, something even deeper emerges, emotional independence. Because freedom from seeking approval is only the beginning. True power comes when your emotions are no longer tethered to his actions, words, or moods. A narcissistic man thrives on emotional reactions. Your anger, sadness, frustration, or even your fear is his currency, the proof that he still matters, the signal that he can still influence you. But when you cultivate emotional independence, you refuse to supply that currency. You feel deeply, you experience fully, but you do not surrender your inner calm or your sense of self to him. Your happiness, your grief, your joy, they belong entirely to you. And that realization is a revelation, not just for you, but for him. Because he has built his world on emotional leverage, and when it disappears, he feels powerless. Emotional independence is quiet, consistent, and unassailable. It doesn't need drama to assert itself. It doesn't need confrontation to validate its existence. It simply lives in the choices you make every day. The choice not to argue, not to justify, not to let his presence dictate your inner weather. When he sees you laugh without checking if he approves, when he witnesses you making decisions with confidence instead of anxiety, when he notices that your emotional world is yours alone, he experiences a kind of helplessness he cannot manipulate or challenge. And that helplessness is devastating because it exposes the fragility of the control he once assumed was absolute. Emotional independence is freedom in its purest form, the ability to exist, to thrive, and to love yourself without needing anyone to validate it. And in that space, he is powerless because the energy he once commanded through manipulation and fear no longer exists. You have become whole, unshakable, and untouchable, and there is nothing he can do to change it. And as emotional independence roots itself deeply within you, it opens the door to something even more transformative: joy without permission. Because when you no longer hurry your emotions to him, you stop waiting for approval, validation, or recognition to feel alive. You laugh freely, you celebrate quietly or loudly, and you savor life on your own terms. That joy is terrifying to a narcissistic man because it exists entirely outside his control. He cannot take credit for it, twist it, or use it to feed his ego. Your happiness is yours, and that is a truth he cannot bear. He has built his sense of importance on the assumption that your world revolves around him, that your highs and lows, your smiles and tears, are all connected to his presence or absence. But when you exist joyfully, unapologetically, without asking permission, he sees the illusion shatter. He cannot provoke jealousy, guilt, or fear, because your contentment is autonomous. This is not loud defiance, it is quiet revolution. Each moment of laughter, each pursuit of passion, each choice to embrace life fully sends a message louder than words. Your power no longer lies in my hands. That is what makes joy without permission so unsettling. He cannot manipulate it, cannot diminish it, cannot reclaim it. It thrives independently, nourished by your self-respect, your boundaries, and your authenticity. And as you move through life with that unshakable sense of happiness, he experiences helplessness, frustration, and a sense of irrelevance he cannot resolve. You are no longer performing for anyone, you are no longer bending for anyone, and you are no longer waiting for anyone to give you permission to exist fully. And in that freedom, in that unborrowed joy, you have become untouchable, complete, and free, living proof that his influence over you has ended. And finally, after reclaiming your worth, your boundaries, your silence, your authenticity, your growth, your independence, and your joy, comes the ultimate act of liberation, walking away whole. Because all the lessons, all the healing, all the inner work culminates in a single, unshakable truth you no longer need to fight for your peace or prove your value to anyone who refuses to see it. Walking away whole is not an act of anger, revenge, or defiance. It is an act of self-respect, dignity, and completion. It is saying with every step that your life is yours to live, your happiness yours to claim, and your energy yours to protect. A narcissistic man cannot endure this because it is the final unraveling of the power he once held. There is no conflict left to exploit, no reaction to provoke, no insecurity to manipulate. You are no longer a character in his story, you are the author of your own. And the beauty of walking away whole is that it is quiet, unshakable, and absolute. It carries no bitterness because there is no need for validation, no need to justify your freedom, no need to look back. Every smile you wear, every calm breath you take, every fulfilled moment you live is a testament to a life reclaimed. It shows him, more than words ever could, that control, manipulation, and illusion cannot touch a soul that has been fully awakened. Walking away whole is the culmination of every choice, every boundary, every act of self-love you have made along the way. And in that completeness, you are untouchable, serene, and free, a force he cannot influence, cannot contain, and ultimately cannot survive emotionally. Because the one thing a narcissistic man cannot endure is not being needed, not being feared, not being loved, but being irrelevant in a life that moves forward without him. And that, above all, is what breaks him. So here's the truth. I want you to feel deep in your bones. None of this is about hurting him. None of this is about proving him wrong. It's about proving yourself right, proving that your life, your happiness, your peace, and your power belong to you and no one else. Every boundary you set, every silence you hold, every moment you choose authenticity over approval is not just an act of defiance. It is a declaration of freedom. It tells the world, and more importantly, yours, Aleph, that you are no longer negotiable, no longer a supporting character in someone else's story, and no longer willing to shrink for anyone else's ego. And that is magnetic, unstoppable, and life-changing. Because when you embrace these truths, when you live them fully, the energy you carry becomes irresistible. People notice it. Life shifts around it. Doors you never imagined open. Opportunities that once seemed impossible appear. And the weight of fear, doubt, and control falls away like shadows at sunrise. Imagine walking into every room with the quiet confidence that nothing, and no one can destabilize you. Imagine loving yourself fully without asking for permission, living fully without needing approval, and moving forward without looking back. That is power. That is liberation. That is the ultimate life you have been waiting for. Now, let me tell you this, a narcissistic man cannot endure it. He cannot stand it because it strips away every illusion, every manipulation, every false pedestal he has built. And as you rise untouchable and whole, it isn't about breaking him, it's about setting yourself free. Your story, your life, your happiness, they are yours to claim. Step into it fully. Walk boldly, laugh loudly, shine unapologetically, and never ever let anyone dim the light that only you can carry.